Chip Siskey will now demo tool sharpening.
Tool sharpening. Yeah. Well, it's good to be back here. Need to come more often, but at least I come often enough to pay my dues, right? So that's a plus. Tool sharpening is probably the most important thing you've got when you're wood turning. I spent a lot of money on a new lathe once and then found out that when I bought a new grinder, all of a sudden my turnings improved, and wondered if I'd kept the old lathe and just got the new grinder. You know? So you really need to pay attention to your grinding. It definitely will improve your turning. So, how many people here sharpen with a Tormac? Anybody? Got a few. Okay. Everybody else with a grinder? Okay. Anybody with the belt sanders? Got one, two. Excellent. Okay. Well, I thought we'd just kind of walk through the basics. Does anybody not have a way to sharpen their tools right now? There's one. All right. Two. Don't have a system of doing it? Well, I would highly recommend a system. You know, if you were a professional turner and you did this all day, 8 hours a day, day after day, you'd be really good at micro managing that tool. If you apply it to the wood and it doesn't quite cut, you know how to tip it to get the bevel rubbing correctly, and you'd be able to use pretty much until you pick up. But for those of us who have to work during the day, we just have a few hours at night to play with this kind of stuff, it really helps you if all your tools are ground identical. Okay, so like I have 3 different size bull gouges, but I have actually 6 bull gouges. Then I have 3 ground in one fashion and 3 ground in another fashion of different sizes. But all 3 of my tools that are at a 45-degree angle are identical. So it doesn't matter which tool I pick up, my muscle memory gets to kick in because I'm going to approach that wood the same with every one of those tools. Now, does that mean I can't pick up somebody else's tool? No, of course you can, but you're going to have to change that angle ever so little. And that's just something that you'll pick up over time, but if you're new to it, it's pretty difficult to get there. So I would definitely recommend some kind of a system. The Wolverine system here is a very popular system because it's very versatile. The Sorby system is a little more restricting, but it's a little more foolproof. So that's one of the trade-offs you kind of have to look at. Expense-wise, both systems, you're going to wind up spending about the same amount of money, push come to shove. I know that when the tool show was in town, they had this Sorby system for I think $450, and then I bought some additional accessories, and it's ended up spending another $80. You can real easily wind up spending that with a good grinder, with a good set of wheels, and the Wolverine setup. So it's kind of whichever one you think might be best for you. Sorry about the cough. Had the cold about 3 months ago. The cough's hanging on, so we're dealing with it.
Which will stand up better, the CBN wheel or the belt on the Sorby?
Which will stand up better?
Yeah, which will sharpen longer, longer use?
Well, that I don't know. I can't answer that. That's a good question, though. And that's one of the problems with having so much information available on the internet these days. There's no editor, right? You read a lot of things from a lot of people, and do they really know what they're talking about? And that gets very difficult. And I finally did find a good article written by a metallurgist who is a wood turner about the CBN wheels, and I learned a lot about them. And we'll talk about that here in a few minutes. But as far as longevity of this wheel, I can't tell you. I have not played with one long enough. I haven't heard people complain about them, but if you accidentally drop a jig into this wheel, I'm sure it's going to be damaged. Okay, I don't think that the way that this system is set up, it's a little more foolproof, and you can't as easily ruin it by dropping a tool into the wheel. And if I get the guard off here, I can just pull this belt off and swap it out with a new belt for $18. Okay, versus over here, this is a better wheel than I have at home. This wheel is probably what, a $200 wheel at least.
No, that's the Ron Brown.
$120 with Ron Brown.
That's round.
How much?
$120 with Ron Brown.
You guys should be shoppers. I like that. So, that having been said, there's some drawbacks to this wheel, and maybe we should start at the beginning and get there, because I'm getting a little out of sync, out of order here, and that's fine. We can do that. So you guys holler out any questions you have, okay? So the theory in sharpening is you got two ways to go. You got slow and wet, or you got fast and dry, okay? The Tormac is slow and wet, and it will put a pristine edge on any tool that you have. If you're a carver, you want that edge. If you're a turner, it's a little bit of overkill. You're going to knock that edge down pretty quickly when you start turning. The problem with that Tormac tool, I mean, if you have it, use it by all means. But the problem is when you buy a tool out of the package, it does not necessarily have the profile you want to end up with on it. And reprofiling that tool will take you a long time with the Tormac, okay? I ran into a guy, long story, but in Branson, and he had a booth at one of these places. And he was fighting his skew. He could not make it work. So, stand there, wait for my wife anyway. So we had a long talk about why his skew didn't work and how we could make it work. And he said, great, let's do it. And he pulled out his Grizzly wet grinder. And I stood there for about 45 minutes to make any progress on getting that skew in the shape he needed it. We got there, but it was a good thing my daughters were shopping because they can shop forever. And so it kept me occupied. But, I could have done the same thing in 10 minutes on this grinder. So it's something to keep in mind, okay? This belt sanding unit as well could have done it in the same amount of time. Both of these are very efficient and can work very quickly. When you get a unit like this, the minimum you would want is an aluminum oxide wheel, and that's what we have over here. This white wheel is aluminum oxide. Sometimes they're pink in color, okay? The original aluminum oxide wheels that were available to us back in the 80s and after that were of a density that the best turning speed, or the best speed to use to sharpen your tools, because when you're grinding that metal on this wheel, it's much like when you're cutting a piece of wood with your tool. The speed matters. It helps you to be at the right speed for the density of the wood when you're cutting, and it helps to be at the right speed with your grinding wheel to cut your metal. So 7,225 surface feet per minute is what Norton and One Way both say is the optimum speed. Well, if you multiply that out, that's an 8-inch wheel running about 3,600 RPM is closer to 8,000, right? A 6-inch wheel is starting to get down closer to less than 6,000. So if you get an 8-inch wheel, 3,600 RPM, you're really set to run these particular stones. Now, stones come in different hardnesses, and every 1,000 RPM faster you rotate, the stone acts as 1 grade harder. So as stones became more available with more options to us, then they've actually come out with some harder stones that allow you to use them on a slower speed grinder. But when push comes to shove, the art is to get that tool on and off of that wheel very quickly. And in doing so, you will generate very little heat. If you have a slower speed grinder, you wind up having to have your tool on that wheel a little longer to get the same sharpness, and you actually produce more heat. So it's a little counterintuitive to the old school thought process of the slower I go, the less friction I have. But in reality, you have to keep your tool on there longer to get it sharp, and you end up generating a little more heat. Okay? So, so I mentioned this aluminum oxide is a good wheel to use. The reason it's a good wheel is it's friable. And what that means is that it's a lot of abrasive that's held together with an adhesive. And that adhesive is designed to give way. So this wheel actually comes apart as you use it. Well, as it comes apart, it's bringing fresh material around, and the material is cooler. The reason you don't want to use the gray carborundum wheels that come with the grinders, a lot of them, I think this one came with this, didn't it? With the aluminum oxide.
Yeah, it had a gray one on the other side.
Okay. The reason you don't want to use those gray wheels is they get packed with the metal shavings, the metal pores. The pores get packed with pieces of metal, and then all of a sudden you're rubbing metal on metal very fast, which generates a lot of heat. So by having this wheel coming apart as you're using it, you'll wear the wheel out quicker, but also you've got fresh, cool material coming around all the time. Okay, as a turner, biggest problems we have are vibration and heat. When we're turning on our piece of wood, when we're sanding on our piece of wood, we have to keep the heat down. And the biggest problem we have grinding is vibration and heat. So that is a very good option, especially if you're just getting started, because it's a very reasonable cost. Okay. Now the next step up from this that works very well is a ceramic wheel. A ceramic wheel lasts you about 5 times longer than this wheel will. It will generate slightly more heat than this wheel, but it'll last longer. You got a little trade-off there. So most of the time I choose to use a ceramic wheel. The silicone oxide wheels that they have don't work well for turning tools. They would be for a harder grade tool. And so I would go straight from aluminum oxide to ceramic if you want to do that. And your next choice would be the CBN wheel as quality of wheels go. Okay? And the CBNs are getting cheaper and cheaper all the time. Definitely something you might want to consider. But there's some drawbacks to the CBN wheel. First of all, you have to sharpen high-speed hardened steel with this wheel. If you choose to sharpen anything else with it, you will block the pores of this particular wheel and won't be able to sharpen any longer with your high-speed steels. Okay. Now there is a beauty to this wheel, and really we kind of need to talk about tools and tool steel itself to understand that. So in the old days they made tool steel, and this lathe bed is made out of tool steel. The tool rest is made out of tool steel, and the tools were made out of tool steel. But they found if they added some other minerals to the tool steel, some other metals, namely vanadium and moly, thank you. Those metals bind together and create carbides. And those carbides in your tool make it a high-speed steel, a better steel. But the trick is getting those carbides mixed evenly throughout that steel is what really just makes the distinguishing quality of that steel. If you get some high-speed steel tools like the good old Craftsman tools that we all find now and then at garage sales and whatnot, it is a high-speed steel. It does have these carbides in it. However, they aren't mixed very evenly throughout there. So you may sharpen that and it may stay sharp for quite some time, and you sharpen it again and it goes dull immediately. And that's because now you're into that tool steel between the good stuff, if that makes sense, okay? So the higher quality tools, like the M2 tools that Crown and Sorby put out, the M4 tools that One Way puts out, they've all just taken a little more time to make sure that those carbides are small enough particles and evenly mixed throughout the metal. So it makes the metal a better quality. Recently they've come out with some other tools, and they've had powdered metal for a while. But the powdered metal, what they call the M42, which is the new Carter tools, those they've introduced cobalt into the mix. And you guys like that word super, so they call those super high speed tools. Okay? Once you get that cobalt in there, the particles are getting even harder. Well, the problem is when you sharpen those on aluminum oxide and even the ceramic wheels, they're used to cutting away that tool steel and exposing those chunks, those carbides, okay, which are like little teeth that help you cut quickly. But now that we have the CBN wheels, the CBN wheel will actually sharpen those carbides. They'll actually cut through the carbides and sharpen them. So you will get a far better quality grind off the CBN wheel if you're using the very high-end tools. Okay, so that's all. And what do you use, right? And when I'm choosing my tools, I'm pretty careful about the cost, right? It all costs money. If you don't sharpen well and you sharpen your tool frequently and it gets short in a hurry, they call that tool tuition, because you're learning quickly that you can waste away a tool. So that's the other reason that I really recommend using a jig. You take off just as much as you need to get that tool sharp. If I'm using this grinder, it should take longer for this grinder to come up to speed than it should for me to sharpen any tool. So it's that when I'm choosing my tools, the harder the tool is to sharpen, the more money I'm going to spend on that tool. Okay, so I use a 3/8 spindle gouge a tremendous amount. So I buy a high dollar 3/8 spindle gouge. I don't use scrapers that often, and a scraper is the easiest tool for me to sharpen. So to me, it doesn't make sense for me to spend a lot of money on a high grade scraper when I know I can sharpen very quickly and move on, and I'm not going to use it as often. So just something to think about as you shop for tools. You know, just because you bought one and it's great doesn't mean you have to buy every tool of the same brand, right? So something to think about. Are you tired of listening to me talk yet?
Nope.
Anybody still excited about talking? Shall we?
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
The old Sears tool. If you say it's ideal to sharpen on the CBN wheel or not to use that on there?
It will sharpen fine on a CBN wheel.
It
Yeah.
won't clog the pores or anything?
Not as long as it's a high speed steel. It's been quenched and it's heat resistant enough. It would be fine. If you got the very, very early tools that are tool steel, you know, I'd get a little more leery of that, simply because the heat it produces is the animal that causes you grief, right? So if I'm going to sharpen on any grinder, first thing I'm going to do, especially if I'm using these not the CBNs, but the more traditional wheels, they have to be flat, they have to be round, and they have to be fairly well balanced. You have a balancer on this one?
No.
Okay. You can buy a balancing system that will be a flange around your wheel that you can set screws, they move, and you literally balance it like you would balance the wheel on your car. Okay? So if you have one that's out of balance, that's something to consider getting. That's part of the beauty of these wheels, is they're pretty much usually balanced pretty well right off the shelf. They do tend to wobble if they don't fit well together. And there are washers that are concave shaped that are made so that one fits into the other, and they will give a little bit to bring these into true. So keep that in mind. If you put one of these on and it wobbles, don't panic. You can fix that, okay? Because that's a problem that a lot of people have experienced with these.
Where do you get those?
I ordered mine from that Wood Turning Wonders, I believe is the name of the company. I'm sure that they have put a fancy name and a fancy price on something you could get anywhere if you knew what to ask for. But it's a concave shaped washer and a second one that fits in there, and they ride on each other, and you can adjust it. Okay. So the balancing system is something you want to pay attention to. If you're out buying your wheels for the first time, you really want to look at the label of the wheel. You want to buy from a reputable manufacturer. Okay, this is a lot of abrasive. It's glued together in a mold. When they mold that, if it's not done with a little bit of quality control, that wheel will get lopsided. There'll be more abrasive on one side than the other. It'll be a little thicker on one side than the other. It'll be out of balance, and it'll vibrate. It's very difficult to sharpen your tools if you have to chase the grinder around, right? So ideally you want this to run as smooth as possible. Now, the next thing is, how do I get this wheel clean? You can see this wheel currently has a little gray stripe down through there. That means it's already got metal particles in there. So it really needs to be cleaned. This is how I would set up a grinder, and how I do not have a CBN wheel on mine yet, but my wheel has gotten worn and small, and I bought a replacement. I'm going to replace it. But I'm going to leave the other wheel as a more traditional wheel, because every once in a while I take a bolt over there and I grind the edge. You use a hacksaw to cut it off, and you want to grind the edge. I know I can't do that on a CBN, so I'm keeping at least one wheel, my reprofiling wheel, that doesn't get used as frequently as a traditional wheel. So I have to have it clean, and that's something we have to do once in a while, is dress the wheel. I have to make sure that it's in round, and I have to make sure the surface is flat if I'm going to get good results off of it. So got it out there, hiding it from myself. So I've got two options to do this easily and correctly. The one thing I don't recommend is getting that handheld stone that's on a handle that you push up here. What's going to happen is, if that wheel's out around, it's going to push back at you, and you're going to go in and out with it, and it's going to be out around when you finish. And you can't stop that. Although Dale Nish did correct me once and tell me to use it anyway. So, one way to come out with this product that works pretty well. The idea behind this is, you can see it from that angle, but as you tighten this end, you can see it moves this out ever so little. And in doing so, it rocks that diamond into the wheel. So you can remove a very minute amount of that wheel, and if it still has a dark streak, then you give the handle a quarter turn and do it again. And it will work very well. The problem is getting it all aligned is a little testy to get it aligned. If you're using one of these, it's wise once in a while, take a little beeswax, a little paste wax, whatever you have, put a little wax across here, because it's got to slide on that piece. And then when you hold on to it, you want to squeeze with your fingers and hold these two together. So I'm grinding on this half of the wheel. That half of the wheel I'm not grinding on. So it's worn more on that side. So I give this a little turn and come across it again. Another turn. And I'm watching that gray streak, waiting for it to disappear. So I'm removing very little of the wheel with each pass. We might want to look into a balancing system on this one. I may know somebody who want to donate one of those to the club. Okay, this is a second option. This is a product put out by a gentleman named Geiger. I don't know if any of you are familiar with his products. He's known more for, he's one of those piercers. They should have their own category, shouldn't they?
Piercer,
The
yeah.
piercer. But he's come up with a little product here. Diamond again, same idea, but it runs along this table. And I find it just a little easier to adjust. Okay. So I can adjust that in, move the table just a hair closer. And we still got a little bit of a gray streak there. I say it's easier to adjust as I fuss with it. All right, never mind. Maybe it's not so easy to use. Which wheel is it?
I think it's that stone one because we didn't have it on there for a while and it ran pretty well.
Ran smooth. All right, another thing we have to talk about, because we always have to talk about safety, because you get those shavings in your Diet Coke, is bad.
Yeah.
But, you know, dust is exactly, yeah. Dust is something that we really fight as wood turners. Anytime we're sanding, we really need to pay attention to that dust, because it'll get in your lungs, it'll mess you up, right? The very fine dust has the same effect as secondhand smoke. It's going to collect sulfates and nitrites out of the air, and instead of exhaling them as you normally would, they're going to settle in your lungs. They're going to turn into nitric acid, sulfuric acid. It's called emphysema. Okay? So, be careful when you're wood turning. But also be careful when you're working with this. I had a gentleman working on my air conditioner, HVAC man, come in, and he had a helper. His brother-in-law came to help him, and he was an old metal worker, and he said, be careful with that grinder. Wear your dust mask. If you're going to reprofile your tools, you sharpen a whole lot of them at once, get that dust mask on. Because the metal particles, they can't go anywhere. If they get in your lungs, they're there forever. Okay, so keep that in mind. Okay? Okay, that's my public service announcement. Back to your program. Okay, so once I've got that wheel smooth, I know I'm good to go. I know it's round, I know it's flat, I'm in good shape to move on. Again, this is our rougher wheel that we typically would reprofile with. This is our smoother wheel that we typically sharpen with. Did anybody bring tools to sharpen? Got one? Got some? All right. We got some good ones out here. Well, let's take a look at them, and maybe we can fix them as we go here.
What do you want?
Well, I'd like to start with scrapers.
Mel did these, so they're good.
Fantastic. Okay. Skew. Excellent. We'll do this one in a minute or two.
I got a good one in here.
Here, I brought my safety glasses, and I'm wearing my everyday glasses, right?
You ever seen anything like that?
Yes, I have. Absolutely. That is a Continental.
Yeah, it's probably carbon steel too.
That is a very old Continental. Absolutely.
And some homemade ones.
Excellent. Excellent. Let's work with this one a little bit. Yeah, this one we're going to save. We're going to use over there, so we don't want to mess up this pretty wheel. But we will definitely hit those. Okay. Anybody bring a scraper? That's why I wear the other glasses. I can see over. Okay. Well, we'll start out here with a flat nose, square nose scraper. Okay. Now, it makes sense, and it seems very logical, that this wheel is plenty wide enough. I should just be able to hold it up there and go. Problem with that is the same thing as if you held your sandpaper one place on your wood, right? You're going to get scratches in that one place. You got to run that sandpaper back and forth as the wood's turning. You got to run this tool back and forth along this wheel so you don't get striations where the grit is. All right? I'm going to keep using those glasses anyway, the rate I'm going. Now,
We didn't want it to get hot.
now Time and Clay was the person who started one way. Yeah, we're not going to use that anyway. Okay? And he didn't put any markings on his tools here. And that's going to be the exactly opposite if we look at the Sorby system. But he knew that he designed the system for you to build around your grinder. And he knew your grinder was going to be the varying heights. And he tells you in the instructions about where to put it, but he knew you weren't going to get it exact. So he didn't put any angles or degrees on his machine. And that's why you keep around an angle finder of some kind. Okay, so this one does not have an angle that I need for this particular tool, but it does have a multitude of angles on there. So if you need to check an angle at any time, you can hold this up against your tool and you can get, it's not going to work on that one either, but you can find your angle. And has everybody used one of those before? So I like to grind these at 45 degrees. I can bring this around to 45 degrees. I can slide that in there and see, yeah, I'm pretty darn close to 45 degrees. Okay. You guys ever seen one of those before? You can try it out there. Another option is just to take a good old-fashioned protractor, steal the one from your kids. They aren't going to pay attention during math class anyway. And you lay that protractor here on the side of your bench and you draw some lines at the various angles. Then you can hold your tool up to the side of the bench. Actually, you'd hold it in this fashion up to the corner of the bench, and you can choose the right angle that matches up. Okay, so that's an option that works very well, very easy. Now, I like my grinders 80 degrees. Old school said you have your grinders ground way, your scrapers ground way back. The theory is that the sharper that edge is, the smoother cut you get. Reality is, this is the least efficient tool we're going to use as a scraper. Okay, so as it touches the wood's coming down across it, it knocks that edge off pretty quickly if there's nothing behind it to back it up. And also it will overheat the tool pretty quickly if it doesn't have a heat sink of more metal behind it. So an 80-degree angle still gives you an edge that's sharp. It's the burr that does the work on a scraper. 80 degrees gives you clearance, so when you put it up to the wood you don't get bound up, but still is able to support that edge. So the way this is designed, you would come up here and you would roll this around until you didn't see light through there if we had a light. Okay. And then you're going to bring this up center to center. Slide one direction, center to center, and slide the opposite direction. I didn't do a very good job. I actually have light. So I put around the bottom half of my tool. And I can see that, but if you're not used to looking for it, the trick is to take a marker and color the end of your tool. And then when you put it against the grinder, you'll see exactly where the marker was removed. So now you know where it's rubbing. Which that made it look like I did it right, which is totally wrong. So I think I need to tip this table down just ever so slightly. One direction, the other direction, and now I did just the opposite. I tipped it a little too far. You can see I removed the marker from the top side, which is what I want to do the work anyway, but it wasn't even across there. Now part of that is caused by the hollow grind, right? Does everybody understand the theory of the hollow grind? By the way, I got a nice burr on there I can cut with, okay?